we're gonna do a pretty quick kind of Kubrick ranking. And in the chat, what is your favorite Kubrick movie? Because we're all about to figure out what mine are. This shouldn't take too long. I won't spend too much time on each one. Yeah, recently I got back into Stanley Kubrick. I haven't watched Kubrick in a couple of years, I think. He used to be my favorite director. It used to be really easy to say my favorite director is Stanley Kubrick, and like no one would ever argue with it. And maybe that's what kind of bored me about him. Another thing that bored me about Stanley Kubrick is that like since I'm involved with like the YouTube film tube thing, you type in Stanley Kubrick and it's like a guy's version of astrology or something. You see all these videos that are like 7 hidden subliminal diamonds in The Shining, or like shit like that. And it's like that's the most annoying kind of film content to me. It's subliminals and it's fucking like hidden shapes and like sacred geometry of Full Metal Jacket. Like fuck off. What do you stop it? Stop it. That's not what makes any of these movies good, right? So I kind of hated the discourse surrounding Kubrick for a while, but I got back into him, and I may have got back into him in that because of the director's tier from the stream we did recently, where I wanted to put him at B, but I had to put him at S. There is something in me that I couldn't resist. I couldn't fight it. Stanley Kubrick's an S tier filmmaker, and now I want to revisit his work. Now I want to watch all these movies again because I love them so much. Now I'm remembering how much I love them. Like, I think Kubrick's great if you live in a bubble, in isolation. His movies, I think, are phenomenal. I just don't want to hear like other people's wild interpretations because they sound like new age bullshit to me. Like the discourse surrounding Stanley Kubrick sounds kind of wild. But let's start this off with Eyes Wide Shut, which is my favorite Stanley Kubrick movie. I think it's lovely. It goes directly to the S tier. Yep, Eyes Wide Shut, directly to the S tier. And The Shining tied, I guess. We shall see. Do you like The Shining? Those are your two favorite Kubricks? Not a bad selection at all. Strangelove, Shining, and Eyes Wide Shut. Those are your favorite Kubricks? Not bad. Not bad. I'm liking seeing Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah, I'm liking seeing Eyes Wide Shut on here on so many people's favorites, or at least mentioned, right? At least mentioned. Isn't my favorite one, but I get the most excited for how bizarre he gets, even by his standards. Yeah, and he does have a pretty bizarre standard, right? Like that's something people don't talk about Kubrick much. There is like this kind of perverse or disturbed nature to a lot of his movies, even or especially Doctor Strangelove, right? Like even back then, certainly with Alita, The Shining is one that I like to watch most, though. I totally get that. And we got another Eyes Wide Shut. I can honestly say that we all have like objectively the best taste in the world. Because Eyes Wide Shut is Kubrick's best movie. It's so good. That Nicole Kidman monologue, like, holy shit, man. Like, Kubrick never filmed something like that before. He never filmed a whole lot of things like an Eyes Wide Shut before. And I love the score that, like, oh my God, I can't, like, do it. I can't mimic it. But everything about Eyes Wide Shut, I think, is so cryptic and mysterious and sexy and scary. Like a whole lot of very intense emotions. I think that Kubrick's final film, like if I made a tier for, I just made one of the best debuts. If I made a tier list for the best final films, the best swan songs, Eyes Wide Shut is maybe the most impressive final film a director ever made. It's so good. So good. I don't like Spartacus. I'm gonna put that in the D tier. Is that even really a Stanley Kubrick movie, or is it a Stanley Kubrick / Kirk Douglas movie? And I know he came in to clean up someone else's mess. I don't see a whole lot of Kubrick there, so it might not even be fair ranking that one. But I'm not into Spartacus. I am into A Clockwork Orange. I think that Kubrick has 3 S tier movies, which is a lot for a director to have, in my opinion. Having 3 S tier movies makes you one of the masters. And the second S tier movie is A Clockwork Orange for me. I think it's brilliant, excellent dystopian the film about almost the impossibilities of adolescent redemption, or like what's the point of coming of age in a world that is just so twisted and frightening? What's the point of morality, or of instituting a moral code in a universe that doesn't necessarily possess a moral compass that's worth championing? Like, who becomes your champions then? Alex DeLarge does. I think it's terrifying. I think it's great. I consider it a coming of age movie because coming of age movies are largely about attempting to correct adolescent behavior, and A Clockwork Orange certainly shows you the dangers of doing that improperly, or maybe shows you the dangers of the state forcing the correcting poor behavior, forcing that kind of correction on a disturbed and psychotic youth. 2001, I'll put it in the B slot actually, because that's one I have tried to rewatch, and I remember the first time I watched it, and I thought it was just engrossing. I was like, "Oh my god, hello cinema. I've arrived. Holy shit!" But I try watching it now, and it's lost its touch. I think it'll go up to an A if I can ever see it on the big screen. I think that I need that kind of it needs that kind of jolt for me to kind of reawaken my love with 2001. But B is not a bad place to be. 2001's really good. Fear and Desire, it's more of a Kubrick film than Spartacus was, but it is D tier material. Doctor Strangelove is an A Kubrick film for me. I think it's very funny. I think it's poignant. I think that Peter Sellers is excellent. George C. Scott is super good, and it's one of the. I think it's so important to Kubrick's catalog, not only because of its political commentary and satire, but because of how he adapted it, right? Because I think it's based on a book called Red Alert that was a very serious kind of espionage tale, a very serious Cold War story. And when they were adapting it, they couldn't help but Kubrick and his writing partner couldn't help but laugh at the morbidity of it all, at just how dark like the novel was, and it was a very serious thing, and they couldn't help but laugh at it. So they kind of adapted this very serious novel into one of the best black comedies of all time. And I think there's a lot of great photography there. I think it might be Kubrick's best black and white photography, actually. That war room or whatever, every scene, every frame of the war room looks amazing. Barry Lyndon, also A, but I think lower than Doctor Strangelove. Barry Lyndon's excellent. Not a whole lot to say about Barry Lyndon. I just think it is a dazzling film. I think it's a totally absorbing film, and I really love it. He's great. I've heard interviews with him, and it was refreshing hearing him discuss his progress and stuff, humanizing his interests and techniques away from the crazy interpretation. Yeah. Yeah, like I think that cinephiles and largely it's like film bros, right? Like elevate Stanley Kubrick to the status of God, and like we it's hard to imagine Stanley Kubrick making like a fucking like dick and fart joke. Like it's hard to imagine him as a human being when we put so much emphasis on. I've seen videos on YouTube that insist that he was part of the Illuminati based on Eyes Wide Shut. I think that's insane. I think that's positively outrageous. Spartacus is worse, not a real Kubrick. Yeah, I don't think it is, right? Like, I don't know a whole lot about the history of Spartacus, but I think he was brought in by Kirk Douglas's request, and then Kirk was kind of mad that he couldn't control Kubrick, but it's still not a real Kubrick movie. Clockwork used to be my fave, but it drags a bit in the middle on subsequent views. I think it still got it. I think it still packs a punch. I love A Clockwork Orange, but no big deal. You still like A Clockwork Orange, and that's all that really matters. Full Metal Jacket is the third S tier movie. I like it a little bit more than A Clockwork Orange. I think the symbolic layering of Full Metal Jacket is beautiful. It's a gorgeous film about extremely ugly things, ugly places, and ugly people. I think Full Metal Jacket is an extraordinary picture, and it's S tier. I love Full Metal Jacket to death. I'm not in the boat that's like the first half is so much better than the second. I'm of the opinion that like in Eyes Wide Shut, the party that we see him go to, and at the beginning, the Christmas party at the very beginning of the film, and the and the cult sex orgy in the middle, that those mirror each other in a lot of interesting ways. I think that Full Metal Jacket, the boot camp, and then the combat mirror each other as well. I think that they are dark universe versions of each other. I think they're both equally enthralling and engrossing and disturbing and excellent. Just an excellent fucking movie. One of the most haunting endings ever is a group of confused boys turn killers singing the Mickey Mouse Club theme song. Uh, Kubrick really knocked it out of the park for me with Full Metal Jacket. I thought it was beautiful. Killer's Kiss is also at the very top of the D tier. I don't hate it, but there's nothing truly remarkable or unique about it. Lolita, C tier movie. It's okay. It's funny. I don't think that Kubrick's film is nearly as complicated as Vladimir's book. Also, maybe just don't make the movie Lolita. Like that's also another like perfectly suitable option. Maybe it shouldn't have been made, but I don't think Kubrick investigated the novel's ideas as well as he could have. But it's still a good movie. It's still fine. The Shining, to me, is also B tier, but I like it right now more than 2001. I think The Shining is excellent. I think a large part of it is an anti-horror movie, though, and I think that part should be investigated a bit more. I think Brian De Palma had a criticism of The Shining, and I love Brian De Palma, and I think his criticism was pretty good. He said that The Shining is obviously a movie made by someone who hates the horror genre, like actively hates it. And I kind of agree because there's that one scene of Shelley Duvall and Danny running around at the very end, and they're running through these different rooms. And they open one door, and it's like the haunted mansion, right? It's like it's totally out of place. There's cobwebs and skeletons and spooky stuff that fall more into the conventions of traditional horror. And I think that that's what Kubrick thinks traditional horror is. And I don't think he likes it. I think he devalues it within the film. I think there are a lot of things in the film that he does that are counterintuitive to the horror genre itself and requires a massive investigation, but no one wants to talk about like the actual structure or the actual mechanics of The Shining. They'd rather talk about, you know, whether or not it's about indigenous genocide or the fucking moon landing. When there are actual like compositional things we can actually explore about The Shining. I think The Shining is really interesting, and I'd like to investigate it with I'll put together a posse and we'll start investigating The Shining and see whether or not De Palma was right, because there are a lot of things in The Shining that do make me think that Kubrick actively despises the genre that he's working within. I think that's interesting and worth exploring. Paths of Glory to me is at the very beginning of the C tier. I think it's okay. I don't think it's one of the best anti-war movies ever made. I think it's a bit I just think it's a C tier movie. Like, I don't think he's holding back. I don't think he lacks confidence as a director. I think there are incredible visuals. I think Kirk Douglas is excellent. And I think the message of the movie is important and it's articulate. I just think that the movie is mostly unimpressive. But I think it's more impressive than The Killing, which is also C tier. But I don't hate it. The Killing's a pretty fun heist noir picture, cosmically pessimist heist and noir picture. But I do quite like it. Looks like I finished the ranking. But look, to have 3 movies in the S tier means you're one of the best. And these are 3 movies that I've been obsessed with ever since I first watched them at least 15 years ago. A tier is beautiful. These are beautiful films that you can really learn a lot from. And then B tier, these are perplexing movies. These are movies that just feel endlessly mysterious with a lot to still figure out about them. C tier to me leaves a bit to be desired, but I don't hate them at all. D tier, I don't think I'll ever watch those again. The way he uses the song Singing in the Rain and Clockwork Orange is so disturbing and also so brilliant. It is. And have you ever seen I saw Malcolm McDowell tell a story about this, that later on he met Gene Kelly, and Gene Kelly either spit in his face or slapped him across the face. And it took Malcolm McDowell a minute to like realize, oh, it's because of that. It's because Gene Kelly put so much effort into Singing in the Rain, into his Hollywood musical magic to make people feel like happy right and cared for and comforted by cinema. And then this fucking Malcolm McDowell, who I believe it was one of the few times Kubrick allowed actors to improvise. He started off improvising, singing that song, and Kubrick did whatever he can get to do to get the rights to use that song. And then this fucking kid, Malcolm McDowell, comes around and turns "Singing in the Rain," a song about like comfort in times, comfort in bad weather, right? And it turns it into this insanely morbid and grotesque mockery, right? It's crazy. I think that's a fun story. It's so good. Singing in the Rain in there is so brilliant and so disturbing. You're so right. Such dread-filled scenes for sure. It's telling that the earliest Kubrick movies are never brought up in the discourse. They aren't his best. Starts off rocky and then moves up. I think he got better and better, honestly, as he got older and older, especially if I put Eyes Wide Shut and Full Metal Jacket at the very top. I think those are the last two movies he ever made. I think he got better and better over time, which makes him kind of unique. Like, I don't think he had a peak, you know? A lot of directors are best kind of in their earlier periods where they're young and energetic. Kubrick needed to refine his philosophy and his approach and his artistry. He needed to refine it. But once he did, with like starting with Doctor Strangelove, right? Never stopped. All bangers. I think he has such a great sense of humor, despite the accusations of his coldness. It's a morbid sense of humor, I guess. I mean, I do think that the coldness is there. I think the humor in his films are really. I think the humor lands, especially with Doctor Strangelove and Lolita. I mean, there are parts of A Clockwork Orange that are just morbidly hilarious. Malcolm McDowell's performance is out of control in there. Parts of Full Metal Jacket are very funny too, but there is a coldness there, and but I think that cold voices in art are necessary. There's a coldness there because Kubrick isn't here to comfort or nurture you with his movies, right? Not really. Even Doctor Strangelove, where I feel like he's his most nurturing as a filmmaker, he's not saying like everything's going to be okay. In fact, he's saying the opposite. He's saying everything's going to be bad, but you can laugh at how absurd the apocalypse is. You can laugh at the absurdity of Armageddon. There's still a coldness there, but we only call it coldness because we're not used to filmmakers not attempting to make us feel comforted by a motion picture made by someone who hates the horror genre. I think that's why he made such an effective horror movie. It comes from such a different place that most camp horror does. It's certainly unique. There's no other movie that feels like The Shining. Even the movies that try to feel like The Shining don't feel like The Shining. And I think that when people ape this style, they're coming from a place of loving the genre, whereas Kubrick hated the genre and, like you said, made an effective one. Like, his spatial impossibilities are really fun to think about, you know. Uh, but I think that it is worth investigating. Um, and it might explain a lot of the mysteries of The Shining. Like you're overthinking it because Kubrick fucking hated horror movies, maybe. Because from what I've read of Kubrick's taste, he had a taste that I can really get behind. One of his favorite movies was Le Notte by Antonioni. I love that film, which I think has a lot more in common with like Eyes Wide Shut. Eyes Wide Shut might be the most similar to the kind of movies he actually appreciated as an artist or as a viewer. Which we don't often think of Kubrick as a viewer, right? We think of him as this untouchable titan of auteurism. It's always been interesting that his filmography is entirely different methods of adaptation. He called himself a reactive artist, always finding or reacting to others and writing and tweaking it. I think that might be what you'd want most from an artist, right? To react to the world he sees around him, and then, like you said, tweak it in his own little ways. Yeah, I think I'm going to get back into Kubrick in a pretty big way. I like Kubrick a lot. I just forgot how much I loved him. He's really, really good. He's really, really good. I don't know how I forgot he was so good.